What's going on, everybody? Welcome on into a condensed version of Wake Up Warchant. It's like Wake Up Warchant Express. It's like the button-down, bare bones version of the program. I'm Aslan alongside Ira Schofel joining us. Corey will be back tomorrow, I promise, for our big blowout bonanza Renegade Express. Go into the Tribal Council, submit your questions. We'll answer them on tomorrow's show. And also feel free to go by iTunes, maybe drop a 5-star review since Ira's been on the show not once but twice this week. Ira, how are you, man?
I'm good, Aslan. How are you?
I'm all right, man. I think maybe I'm choking on my own medicine, talking about things yesterday. I'm like, is it a really big deal if you lose to the Gators in baseball? Is it really that big of a deal? And then you lose for a 7th time in a row, which is the worst in school history. And it's actually growing. I think 6 is the worst, and then now 7 is. We're diving into worse, sort of history here. And now it's 12 of the last 13 against the Gators. So a little bit bummed out. Probably should have listened to you as most everything in my life that these games do matter after all.
Yeah, I don't know if it would have mattered though, buddy. I don't know if your mojo would have carried the day. It's amazing about this streak. I went back and looked at it a little bit after the game, and it's not like, there have been several pitchers duels, which is kind of it's kind of become the storyline that everybody's used to with this series. That Florida has got more and better arms over the last few years. I think Florida State's closed the gap there, but that's kind of been the story, and they've won a lot of these low-scoring games. But there's a 10-7 in there. There's an 11-4, whatever it is. Even when Florida State does score, it seems like then Florida's offense wakes up too. But a lot of times you have a game like this where Florida, scratches out a run early, and then it just seems like Florida State cannot do anything to get done. Although they showed some life late and got a couple runners on, but still couldn't get the big hit.
Just showing new and creative ways of losing and hurting their fans' psyche is just kind of what they do. They said on the telecast this was the 7th time the Florida State and Florida played a 1-0 game. Florida has now won 4 of them. They were split. It was a rubber match, I guess you could say. 3 times prior, Florida State had won 1-0 over Florida in the all-time series, and then Florida had topped the Noles 1-0. So they've now got 4 of those wins when it comes down to these 1-0 victories. So Florida State, I think, drops at 20-6 now. They'll be back at home this weekend, or tomorrow. They'll be taking on Louisville the Thursday, Friday, Saturday set at Hauser. So, what we talked about yesterday, I don't know if there's any parallel to, but we discussed coaching philosophy and changing a locker room in terms of if you're like an ornery, grumpy guy, is it easier for you to all of a sudden become a nice guy and win people over, or can you, be the nice, fun, bouncy guy with the good disposition and then kind of clamp down later on in your career and maybe kind of reinvent yourself? You really can't argue against Mike Martin Jr. and the patience at the plate approach, because they consistently are up there in top 20, top 25 offenses year in and year out in terms of producing runs. But when you get into these situations in these big-time games, and listen, like you said, they've lost 11-7. They've lost in all sorts of different numeric ways when it comes to playing Florida. But it's just so frustrating when you're going up against a team that has so many talented arms like Florida, and then you just sit there with the bat on your shoulder on the first pitch pretty much every single time. There's a couple guys like Cal Raleigh got the green light on he got the green light on a 3-0 count. I think in the 5th or 6th inning he got a green light in the 9th inning with runners on the corners, and he ended up dribbling one to the first baseman which was ultimately the 3rd out. It's just when you're constantly told to be patient, wait for your pitch, be patient, wait for your pitch, you eventually are going to hit a point in the game where you really can't start being so picky. Red Applin went down looking on a pitch that was a little bit outside the plate, but that's going to be called a 3rd strike. It was just too close for comfort. I know Meat's really good about making these guys think during BP and during training, like, listen, all right, here's a 1-2 pitch. Like, you have to treat the 1-2 pitch a lot different than you have to a 2-0 pitch, because your margin for error is just so much more, marginalized. But it's just one of those things where no matter what situation they're in, you're going to have to score runs, and then you eventually have to turn it on when you're behind. And I just feel like that gets them totally out of character, and they really don't know what to do when they have to be aggressive.
Yeah, as you said, and Corey and I have talked about this a lot over the years. We appreciate what Meat's approach is, and I think it certainly makes sense in the macro. If you look at the course of a college baseball season, the inconsistency of the arms, you're going to get a lot of walks. You're going to get, especially if you're as patient as they've been, and you really work on that strike zone. you're going to draw a lot of walks, and college baseball defenses, you're going to run into some bad defenses that make some errors, and all of a sudden you're manufacturing runs at a really high rate. And Florida State's offense has produced runs at an incredible rate over the Mike Martin Jr.'s tenure as the offensive coordinator, I guess you'd say, or a hitting coach.
I'll call him that.
And but the downside to it, I think, and you're touching on, is in these games against Florida, and sometimes I think when they get to Omaha or in the Super Regionals, when you're facing the best of the best, that your guys, it's just they're waiting to capitalize on the other team's mistake, and it works over the grand scheme of things. But I think in a short series or in a one-off like the Florida series, I think sometimes it becomes more difficult because if the pitcher's on and the umpire's giving him the edge, or the black of the plate, or if you just have a pitcher who's just having a great night, and you're taking all those strikes. I mean, you have a night like this. Again, last night Florida struck out 10 batters, only walked 2. Well, this Florida State offense, and part of it this year, they're hurt even more because they've got some injuries. Now Flowers is out. They obviously lost the other kid before the shortstop before the season. So they're a little bit banged up anyway. But this offense against good pitching, if they only get 2 walks, they just don't produce a lot of runs. That's how you end up in these situations. And so, I'm happy to salute the benefits of the approach and over the course of a season. But I do think in a one-off game or in a short series, I think they're at risk if they run into a pretty good pitcher, a hot pitcher, of having this kind of performance.
Well, yeah, because the pitcher doesn't really have to worry about the first strike he throws, because he knows he's probably going to be able to throw whatever he wants and get it across the plate, and then he's got the momentum on his side. Heading into the contest, Florida State was tied for the lead in the nation with 164 walks through 25 games. It's just, I don't know how much, and listen, I mean, again, I'm going to probably pretend like I know a lot more about football than I really do throughout the course of this tenure of this program. Basketball and baseball, I'll try to bite my tongue a lot more because I'm not as educated, I don't think, when it comes to these things. But I just don't know. Again, when you start facing really good competition, a team like Florida who is good defensively, or when you start getting into the super regional round and you don't luck out and get a team like Sam Houston State, when you're playing like really talented, sound teams, this approach is really not going to be able to, you won't be able to feast on them the way you can feast on, NC State if they come to Tallahassee for a set, or Duke, or when you're hosting Xavier or you're hosting Troy. I mean, it just doesn't work as well. And it's been happening for a long time where it works like a charm March, April, May, and then June things start tightening up. And I don't know how much of that is just the nerves and chasing this huge, trying to get this albatross off their neck. But it's frustrating to watch. Because Florida, listen, Andrew Karp, lost in all this is the fact that Andrew Karp looked phenomenal. Went out there and threw his freaking guts out on the line. Went 8 innings, scattered, I think, 4 hits, 2 walks, something of that nature. And allowed only 1 run and punched out 7 guys, and then he loses. And then that's just brutal when you're doing everything right from that perspective. I don't think there was any errors in like that from Florida State in the game. It was an opportunistic hit by Florida. They got a guy on with 2 outs, and they dribbled one through the hole on the right side, got the run, and that ultimately proved to be the game winner. Like, these moments just don't seem to happen to Florida State in games that really matter. And again, I mean, I sat here yesterday and was like, well, these games really don't matter. But to a lot of people, losing yesterday is it's a big bummer, especially when it's 7 in a row to the same team that most people loathe if they root for Florida State.
And 12 out of 13.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, to your point, I think that these Florida games have really illustrated that whole point about, the philosophy. It works against most college pitchers and most college defenses, but if you play a team that really can play defensively and really can pitch, now, obviously that's the case for all offenses. Anybody that, if you go up against a great pitcher with a great defense, you're going to have a hard time. There's a reason Florida won the national championship last year. There's a reason they're perennial the last several years. They're number 2 in the country right now. They've been, it seems like, perennially in the top 5 for the last few years because they've got great pitching and great defense. But I think what's frustrating is it feels like this Florida State team doesn't get many chances, many scoring opportunities in these games. They may have an inning or 2 innings, like the last time they played them in Gainesville, where they scored a few runs early, but then didn't capitalize maybe on all their opportunities. And then all of a sudden, it's like they can't get anybody on base for like inning after inning after inning, and it just feels like they're handcuffed. And again, I think the fact that Florida State's pitching has gotten so much better, it really has. I think is a really positive sign, and it's going to keep them in these games. But they've got to figure out a way to get more offense going against Florida, and it's just not going to come from walks and putting pressure on their defense, because their defense is just too good.
Yeah, bright side, again, Andrew Karp goes 8 innings, throws 98 pitches, so I think that's a little bit of I think he ran out of gas last week against UCF at around 100 pitches. And the fact that he was able to kind of deal that long is a really good sign. And again, if Cole Sands for some reason can't, snap out of a funk, who's to say that Drew Parrish doesn't find his way into being Mr. Friday Night, and then maybe Andrew finds his way into the rotation somehow in terms of the weekend. So a good outing for him. That gives you some hope and some confidence that if things don't work out with the 3 guys you have in the weekend rotation, you can kind of go to Karp, and he might be able to stop the bleeding. Another thing a lot of folks are talking about, Ira, and then we'll pivot away to another topic here, is that you have your best hitter on deck in that moment against Florida. You got Drew Mendoza batting in the 5 hole. So I wonder if that's something that, Levin likes to tinker with his lineups, but that's, that heart of the order, the 2, 3, 4, 5 has not changed at any point this season. It's been Luke, Applin, Raleigh, and then Mendoza every single time. So I wonder if he'll look into maybe shifting something around there. I mean, listen, I'm fine with Cal being up in that spot. And I know everybody's, then if you put him too high in the lineup, and then you end up getting a game where, you're out, it comes up to, the 9th guy in the order or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, no matter what you do in terms of getting guys in the right slot, you're always going to run into a moment like that where one of your best guys might be on the on-deck circle or doesn't get into bat in the last inning, and then, people kind of gnash their teeth over. But maybe there's something to potentially putting Drew higher up in the order. But I don't know who you really would move around at this point.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's not a stretch to say that if you move up in the lineup, you're going to get more at bats over the course of a season. It may not work out perfectly in every single game, but you're going to give yourself more chance at bat. Now, the thing about Drew is, he does. To me, he's a guy that should be a huge RBI guy, and and I don't mind him being 5th if you've got better options in the top spot, in the top of the lineup. But some of these guys have not been consistently producing. I do think, Red Applin, we've seen in the past, he can hit. And so, if he comes through the way you'd expect him to, then it's not a problem. But maybe they're holding out too much hope on Cal Raleigh. Maybe you move him up to the cleanup spot, just flip those 2 guys. But, I think Luke still needs to be in the 2 hole. And then, then eventually, you like to think they're going to get more out of the leadoff spot. But yeah, I just think that in general, you'd want your best hitter to be hitting 3rd or 4th. Best power hitter. And I understand why people get frustrated. They've been frustrated for a while, and then you have a situation like this where he doesn't get a chance to put his bat, take his bat off his shoulder and get in the box with the game on the line. It's extremely frustrating.
So again, Florida takes down Florida State 1-0 in Jacksonville, 7th in a row in the series, 12 out of the last 13. Way to go, guys! Good job, suckers. The Gators, of course, not the Knowles. They'll be all right. Okay, so the other thing that came down yesterday, Ira, I don't know if it caught me by surprise, caught a few people by surprise, was the news that C.J. Walker intends to transfer from the basketball program. C.J. being the point guard, the sophomore, not M.J., the McDonald's All-American from the greater Atlanta area. But still, though, a Walker and a guy who played more minutes, probably more significant minutes than MJ did this season, but he's gone ahead and requested his transfer, and Florida State has granted it.
Yeah, on the one hand, it is surprising because, especially, kind of so soon after the season ended. But on the other hand, in retrospect, it didn't surprise me very much. Just kind of watching his body language during the NCAA tournament, and I know you guys saw a little bit of it when you guys were covering the first 2 rounds. You and Corey were in Nashville.
Yeah, baby.
And I know that the game after, Corey was telling me, and I'm sure you saw it as well, that, after they beat Missouri to advance to the second round, in the post-game locker room, that CJ seemed kind of down, even though they had just won the game. Well, he only played 9 minutes in that game. Trent Forrest played over 30 minutes in that game. And I think, watching them while I was out in L.A. watching them those 2 games in the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight, it just seemed like every time he made a mistake and they would go to Trent, bring Trent off the bench, it just seemed like you could see the expression on his face, kind of like, here we go again. I think he was frustrated. I think he felt like maybe either the coaching staff or maybe the coaching staff kind of lost some confidence in him, and we're starting to feel more confident with Trent and the way he was running the team. And so when you look at it from that perspective, it's not that surprising, because if that was happening at the end of the season, you start wondering, okay, well, what is that going to mean going forward? Look, a lot of people will hear this, and I've seen comments on the message boards and social media that if that's the case, you got to work to get better, and you got to, and all that. Well, yeah, to a degree, but I also understand these guys only have 4 years of college, and if they feel like they're not being used or their future's not what they hope it could be, they're going to, it just happens. It happens at schools across the country. There literally are hundreds of kids transferring at the end of every season now in basketball for reasons just like this.
It's bizarre, and it's so accepted. I feel like football coaches would not let a guy that was on their two deep walk away so easily, but when you have a backup point guard, it's like, yeah, we get it, man. It's all right, man. Good luck, best of luck in your future endeavors. So now everybody's wondering about who's going to be able to, I see all these threads on Warchant, warchant.com. Sign up if you're not a member already, people. You're not living life at its fullest. They're like, who else is going to be able to run the point? And I'm not bad-mouthing, Leonard or Stan in the way they run the offense, but does Florida State really run like a conventional offense where they need anybody, I feel like Terrence can slide in there and run the point if he had to, you know what I'm saying? And obviously Trent is going to probably be the workhorse going forward. It doesn't feel like there's any sort of huge chasm there in terms of talent or a role to be filled.
No, it is important to get another guy that, A, can handle the ball, and B, can kind of handle it in those crucial situations, either against somebody that's really pressuring the ball or, in a situation where you've got to have somebody take care of it and work the clock, and maybe in certain situations, if you're milking a lead, that type of thing. So you want, you'd like to have another really strong ball handler. Florida State doesn't have a traditional offense. It's not like they're going to need a guy who's going to put up 12 assists a game or whatever it is. Most of their offense is a lot of, it's a lot of motion, and it's a lot of interchangeable parts. They'll move guys all over. You'll see post players at the top of the offense. You'll see the guards go down in the paint. They do a lot of different things with motion depending on what the defense is doing. So they don't necessarily need like a pure. I know everybody wants them to have that. I think fans for years have been saying, "Why won't Leonard go get a pass first point guard?" And I think Trent Forrest can be that kind of guy. But I think just somebody who's really strong with the ball. Polite Anthony Polite. I want to say Polite, but I feel like other people are saying Polite. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to go with the crowd and say Polite.
I'll say Polite, so one of us is right.
Okay, that works.
We'll hedge our bets.
He's a guy that will get a look there. He's worked there before. He worked there when Trent Forrest was hurt in the preseason. He was a guy that they had run the point some. So he's an option. But I'm pretty sure, now that scholarship's open with CJ leaving, they can go out and try to sign one. The next signing period starts on April 11th. And knowing Leonard Hamilton, I'm sure they've already got plenty of feelers out and have an idea of who they might want to bring in. The ideal situation, of course, would be doing what a lot of teams have been able to do, is bring in a fifth-year guy. Florida State's done that a couple times in basketball, not with any great success. But that would be the ideal situation, to bring in another guy just to kind of be a steadying force.
It's crazy to see the way that people react, and I don't want you to have to, I'm always criticizing our fan base, aka our subscribers, which is not a good thing, and you're having to put me in check here. But I just understand why he decides to leave, and there's so many people that start throwing shade at the kid, he was a turnover waiting to happen. Again, I didn't watch the basketball team closely enough, I guess, but I think he gave a really good spark in that Michigan game. And I know that was just one game and you're not going to base your whole career on one game, but it just felt like that's a guy that you felt like if he stays within the program, works hard, that he'd be a really good piece. But I guess at the end of the day, too, there's not a lot of scholarships available, especially if Phil gets this red shirt that we don't know when or if it's going to happen. So I mean, maybe it's one of those good things where it does free up a person in mind that maybe FSU does want to pursue, like you mentioned. Leonard and Stan probably have somebody in mind they can go after. And like you said as well earlier, I mean, this happens everywhere. There's literally probably 100 kids, 3-4 star guys that are transferring year in and year out in Division I basketball, because this is just the way it kind of happens. There's just that natural sort of churn through a roster. So we'll see how it goes.
And some of the colleges are like that's their recruiting philosophy. Like gets a ton of those guys. I mean, a lot of these schools, FSU's women's basketball team, Sue Semrau, has done an amazing job with that, finding the right pieces and letting them sit out a year, and they get to practice with you, and then bringing them in. It's something that certain schools have done a really good job of. Florida State hasn't had many. They had that one guy, I think it was Jeff Peterson was his name, point guard a few years ago that did it. I think he had been at Iowa. So I mean, they've done it before, but it hasn't been something they've done a ton of. But as far as like how people feel about C.J. Walker, it's a tough deal. I mean, on one hand, I think people loved him last year because he was high energy. He was part of that boom squad that came off the bench and really gave them a lot of energy off the bench. Was an aggressive, in-your-face kind of guy. Played downhill, tried to get to the basket. This year, I think people thought he would take another step, and there were some good moments, but then there were also some out-of-control moments. But you're right. They don't make the run they made in the tournament without him. I mean, the Xavier game, that was a game he hit was it Xavier or Gonzaga? He hit the 3 threes in the first half. That might have been Gonzaga. Yeah, it was Gonzaga, I think. And so, I mean, he's certainly been a big contributor, certainly been a key player, and probably, would have helped them. I don't think they were happy to see him go. But at the same time, he did have some, he was a little overly aggressive at times, tried to get to the basket too much, threw up some tough shots that turned into points the other way because, he's just running into the lane, throwing it up, and then they're getting a fast break. So I understand why some people were down on him, but there's no question. I mean, he definitely brought plenty to the program and was a big contributor to this run.
And by the way, the last 3 minutes, my verbal diarrhea of asking you a question, that was because I was scrambling over here. I'm pulling up the media guide. I was trying to get the pronunciation guide.
Did you find it?
I did not find it. So I totally failed there. I asked a horrible question and stumbled all over myself, and I couldn't ultimately find the pronunciation guide, which should be like on the first page next to the actual roster, right? It should have everybody, listed right there, and then it should have the way you pronounce their name. But alas, that's not the way that they decided to organize their media guide. So,
why don't you ask another crazy question while I look it up? I'll pretend I'm listening to your question while I'm trying to find it.
How about this?
Now it's driving me nuts now.
Okay, all right. How about this? You do that. I will go ahead and ramble on a story, an anecdotal story that has nothing to do with Florida State, but I just found it a little bit interesting, and you might be able to add something to it. But
sounds good.
Practice resumes this morning, which is part of the reason why we're taping this right now, so that I can have a good night's rest, because it's been out of sorts, everybody. I've been a little bit crabby. No one likes Aslan when he's crabby. Alabama, meanwhile, had practice last night. One of the guys they had that was missing from practice was Van Darius Cowan, which is a guy that, if you're a diehard recruiting fan, you probably remember. He was, I think, at one point.
He committed to Florida State at one point.
Yeah, he was a 5-star. I mean, the kid just looks just like an absolute, just football player. I mean, the guy just chiseled 6'5" or so. I think he went to he's from Sebastian River, I think high school, wherever that is. And I don't know where. I mean, I'm from Florida. I'm born and raised in Florida, but golly, Florida. Let's get a hold of ourselves here. I feel like every year there's a new high school in a new city. Like, how many more cities are we going to start in Florida? Like, are we not good enough with the amount of cities that we have? Like, I only know like maybe 2 or 3 cities on the East Coast between Jacksonville and Miami. And that's like St. Augustine and, Daytona Beach. Everything else on the East Coast, I'm totally oblivious to. But anyhow, he was a gray shirt. He did not get a scholarship last year, but he enrolled at Alabama as a gray shirt where he would be able to go on scholarship this coming spring or this coming winter term or what have you. He also did one of those really fancy commitment videos for Bleacher Report where he wrote a letter to his mother. He was just like, Mama, everything I do is for you. And the reason I'm doing my decision is to put us in the best situation, blah, blah, blah. The video production was literally him at some sidewalk bistro in Paris, France. He was literally in France.
He was in France.
And he said, "Roll Tide." He announced, that's why for the next 4 years I'm going to spend, my career at Roll Tide. And he's in front of the Eiffel freaking Tower, Ira. Like, he went to Paris, France. This was not green screen. This wasn't CGI. He went to Paris, France, announced he was going to Alabama, and they're like, oh, yeah, by the way, we don't have a scholarship for you, man. You can come here if you want, but we don't have a scholarship for you. So he still enrolls anyways. He was crying on signing day, and it was a bizarre sort of thing. Anyhow, he's not at practice. I don't think he's been at practice for the last 2 sessions, and somebody asked Nick Saban, and Saban was literally goes and says, we have an academic standard here that you have to meet if you want to play, and he's not meeting it. And I'm like, dang. Like, Nick's like Belichick. Like, he won't say anything if he doesn't have to. Like, he doesn't want to tell you anything. He's totally tight-lipped. But to hear him, like, actually throw a guy, I guess you could say, under the bus, that's one of those touchy things, right? Even when you guys knew in the past, whether it was last year with a guy like Matthew Thomas or 10, 15 years ago, that's one of those, like, sticky situations, right? You don't want to ever say a guy's not playing due to his grades, because then we all start running with that and make other assertions about who they are and their work ethic and things of that nature. But, like, for Nick Saban to I don't know, like, have you ever heard of a coach just come out and basically say, other than just like, we're just, it's a grade situation kind of a thing, to say we have a standard here academically and you need to meet it to play football? That's not like, that was strong. That's like getting called out and being challenged, I feel like.
Yeah, no, it's really rare. You know, and there are certain coaches who will never get into the reason, like, especially if it's academic related, and a lot of times because, you know, it creates a perception that maybe the kid can't handle the coursework when maybe it's just a matter of him not trying. But yeah, you'll rarely ever hear them. And in fact, there'll be times where a guy will not play and they'll say anything other than the fact they'll make up an injury or whatever before they'll say it was a grade issue or an academic issue. But so yeah, you got to assume. I mean, that kid had issues in high school. I think he got moved around from different high schools. I think he had some trouble in high school. So you have to assume Nick Saban must be just on his wit's end to say that publicly. It seems like I've had coaches bring up academics like once or twice here or there, but very rarely.
And not on the record, like not explicitly, right?
No, and I was thinking back to some of the high profile academic things. I remember, I don't know if you were still here at the time when Broderick Bunkley was playing. Were you still here?
Yes, I was.
At that time?
Uh-huh.
Bunkley, I don't know if you remember, like he was up until preseason camp, like right before preseason camp, he was still like taking classes online and correspondence classes, and he had fallen behind, and he was like taking all these classes at the last minute, and they weren't sure if he was even going to be eligible. But like Coach Bowden would never say what it was. We all knew what it was. We all knew that he was trying to take all these classes, but Coach Bowden would just say, "Oh yeah, he's not out here yet. You know, we hope he's going to be out here soon." So yeah, it's almost silly sometimes why they don't. Yeah, they used to hide behind the Buckley Amendment? Is there a Buckley rule or whatever it was? There's like some rule, which is why they're not supposed to, kind of like HIPAA.
Yeah, the HIPAA for academics, right?
It's like HIPAA's for injuries, but yeah, the same thing for health issues. They have, I think it was a Buckley rule or something like that, where they weren't supposed to tell you, if a guy was having grade problems. So Saban's not having it apparently, huh?
No, he's not, man, and he's cheating and ripping things off of Willie, obviously, because Willie's whole thing is about academics, doing these practices early in the morning, because wherever he's been, once the academics turn around, then the on the field product seems to follow suit. So Nick's watching Willie and taking notes. So let's all be flattered. As we land the plane, did we find out? I looked through it again, Ira. I can't find the pronunciation guide. You want to go ahead and let us all know
what I found was that on the pronunciation guide, there was not a listing for the polite kid. Okay. So I got to assume it's got to be polite, right?
I would assume it. Well, is Kumaji on there?
Is who?
Is everybody else? Is Kumaji on there? Is Fiondu on there? Is everybody else on?
Raekwon Gray is on there.
Okay.
Ryan Ngol was on there. Fiondu Kamigeli's on there. So if polite's not on there, it's got to be polite, right?
I would think the thing is we need Corey here because his father played for Florida State. So obviously Corey would have probably remembered. What do you got? You guys just a bunch. This is like the whole Jerry Rice moment right now, where we can't name like you guys had problems with that, and then like Corey right now will be listening to this and be like, "You idiots! This is how you pronounce it." So we won't have to encounter that again because the Coracle will be joining us tomorrow. So
perfect.
We're done here for now. Ira, thanks for joining us, man. You've been an absolute hoss for like the last 10 years of your life. But especially here, like the last week, man, we really appreciate it. I know you've been going, literally flying coast to coast. So thanks for making time to hang out for a little bit.
Anytime, man. Anytime. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Let's have fun at practice tomorrow. Do something. See you there.
Sounds good.
All right, good stuff. He's Ira Schofel, the managing editor of warchant.com. I'm Aslan Hajavani, the director of digital media. Again, this is a condensed version of the program. We'll be back with a full-bore program tomorrow. In the meantime, get on the warchant.com, get on the Tribal Council, submit your questions, your complaints, anything that you do have in mind on the Renegade Express thread at the top. We will go over it. We will let you air your grievances on the show tomorrow. Again, for Ira, I'm Aslan. Thanks for listening, folks. Have a great day. We'll catch up with you tomorrow.